For thousands of years, Buddhist masters have understood something that most of us spend our whole lives trying to figure out. Why does happiness keep slipping through our fingers? Why do we get what we want and still feel restless? Tonight, we explore their answer, and it is simpler and more hopeful than you might expect. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you are listening from. The Buddha once said that the highest happiness is peace. The stories and teachings you will hear tonight are not complicated. They are not lessons to memorize or techniques to practice. They are simple truths about where happiness actually lives and why we so often look for it in the wrong places. So settle down and let your shoulders relax. Let your breath find its own rhythm. And when you are ready, let us begin this journey together. There is a question that lives quietly inside most of us. We may not always say it out loud. We may not even know it is there. But it hums beneath so much of what we do, what we chase, what we worry about in the dark hours of the night. The question is simply this: what will finally make me happy? We have all felt the pull of it. The quiet belief that happiness is waiting for us somewhere just ahead. In the next chapter of our lives, in the next accomplishment, in the next relationship, the next home, the next season. If only we could arrive at that place, we think, then at last we would feel at ease. Then at last, something inside us would settle and say, yes, this is enough. This is peace. And yet, how often have we arrived at exactly the place we were reaching for, only to find that the feeling fades? The new home is beautiful, but after a few weeks, the walls are just walls again. The achievement felt wonderful for an evening, and then the morning came with new worries. The thing we wanted so badly becomes simply the thing we have, and already the heart is scanning the horizon for the next promise of happiness. The Buddha spoke of this with great tenderness. He did not scold us for wanting to be happy. He understood that the wish for happiness is one of the deepest things inside the human heart. But he also saw, with a clarity that still shines after thousands of years, that most of us are looking for happiness in places where it cannot stay. There is an old story passed down through the Buddhist tradition about a king and the Buddha himself. This king lived in a beautiful palace. His gardens stretched in every direction, filled with flowering trees and fountains that caught the light. He had musicians who played for him in the evenings and cooks who prepared the finest meals. He had advisors and companions and every comfort a person could imagine. By any measure the world might offer, he was a man who had everything. One day, the king heard that the Buddha was passing through the countryside nearby. The Buddha was known for his unusual peace, for a kind of quiet happiness that seemed to follow him wherever he went. The king was curious. He invited the Buddha to visit, and when he arrived, the king welcomed him warmly. They sat together in the shade of a great tree in the palace garden. After some time, the king leaned forward and asked the question that had been forming in his mind. "Tell me," he said, "between the two of us, who do you think is happier? I have everything a man could want. Wealth, comfort, beauty, companionship. Surely this must be happiness." The Buddha smiled gently. He did not argue. He did not lecture. He simply asked a question in return. "Let us try something," the Buddha said. "Sit here, just as you are. Do not call for your musicians. Do not ask for food or drink. Do not reach for any entertainment or distraction. Simply sit here, quietly, with yourself. Can you remain happy like this for 1 hour? The king thought about it. Yes, he said, after a moment. I believe I could. What about 6 hours? The Buddha asked. The king hesitated. 6 hours with nothing to do, no one to speak with, no pleasure to reach for. I am not sure, he admitted. And what about an entire day and night? The Buddha asked softly. 24 hours, sitting here with nothing but your own company. No music, no gardens, no feasts. Just you. Would happiness still be with you? The king was quiet for a long time. Then he shook his head. No, he said honestly. I do not think it would. The Buddha nodded, and there was no judgment in his expression. Only warmth. I have found, he said, that I am able to sit for a day, or several days, or even a week, with nothing at all, and happiness does not leave me. It does not depend on what is around me. It does not need music or gardens or praise. It arises from somewhere inside, and it stays. The king looked at the Buddha for a long time, and then very simply, he said, I think you have found the greater happiness. There is something in this story that goes deeper than it first appears. The king was not foolish. He was not a bad person or an unhappy one. He enjoyed real pleasures. He felt real joy. But his happiness was like a fire that needed constant fuel. Without the logs of entertainment, comfort, and stimulation, the flame would flicker and go out. The moment the world stopped offering him something, his sense of well-being began to waver. The Buddha's happiness was different. It was not a fire that needed feeding. It was more like the warmth of the sun itself. Steady, quiet, coming from within. Not dependent on what the world chose to give or take away. This is one of the most beautiful teachings in the Buddhist tradition. The idea that there is a happiness available to every one of us that does not depend on conditions. Not on getting what we want. Not on the world being arranged just so. Not on other people behaving the way we wish they would. But a happiness that arises naturally, gently, when we stop reaching outward long enough to notice what is already here. The Buddha described this kind of happiness with the word sukha. It is a lovely word. Some scholars say it comes from the image of a wheel that turns smoothly on its axle. When the wheel is true, when it is centered, the cart rolls easily along the road. There is no wobble, no grinding, no strain. Everything moves with a kind of effortless grace. That is sukha. That is the feeling of being centered in yourself, at ease in your own being, the wheel of your life turning true. And when the wheel turns true, you do not need the road to be perfect. You can move over rough ground and smooth ground alike with a kind of steadiness that comes not from the landscape but from within. And the opposite, dukkha, which is often translated as suffering, comes from the image of a wheel that is off-center, a wheel that wobbles and grinds and makes the whole journey difficult. Not because the road is bad, but because something inside the wheel itself is out of alignment. So much of our searching for happiness is really an attempt to fix the road. We think if we could just smooth out the bumps, remove the obstacles, pave the path ahead, then the ride would finally feel easy. But the teaching here is much simpler and much more hopeful. It is not the road that needs to change. It is the wheel. And the wheel is something we carry within us. There is a small, quiet moment that many of us have experienced but rarely talk about. It is not dramatic. It is not the kind of thing that makes for a grand story. But it may be one of the most important experiences a person can have. It is the moment when you are doing nothing at all and happiness arrives on its own. Perhaps you have felt this. You are sitting by a window on a quiet afternoon, looking out at nothing in particular. The light is falling softly across the trees. A bird moves between branches. The sound of the wind is very far away. You are not trying to be happy. You are not thinking about happiness at all. You are not doing anything to earn it, or chase it, or arrange the conditions for it. Your mind, which has been busy all day with plans and worries and lists, begins to slow down. Not because you forced it to, but because, for just a moment, you forgot to keep it spinning. At first, you might not even notice it happening. The thoughts are still there, but they are drifting now, rather than pulling. The plans for tomorrow feel a little further away. The conversation you were replaying in your mind loses its urgency. And in that gap, that small opening where the mind's momentum gently pauses, something very quiet rises up to meet you. It is hard to name. It is not excitement. It is not relief. It is something softer than both. A feeling of ease, of warmth, of being, for no particular reason, simply content to be alive. Simply glad to be here, looking out at the ordinary beauty of the world. This is what the Buddhist teachings are pointing toward. Not a happiness you have to build or earn or chase across the years, but a happiness that is already here, waiting in the spaces between your thoughts, the way sunlight waits behind clouds. You do not create the sunlight. You only need to stop standing in your own shadow. The Buddha once said, "Peace is the highest happiness." Not pleasure, not excitement, not even joy, beautiful as joy can be, but peace. The simple, quiet, unshakable sense that all is well, right here, right now, even if the world outside is complicated and imperfect. That peace is what we are gently turning toward tonight. Now, it would be easy to hear a teaching like this and feel discouraged. We might think, well, that is lovely for the Buddha sitting under a tree, but what about me? What about my busy life, my responsibilities, my restless mind that never seems to quiet down? This is a very natural response. And it is worth saying clearly, you do not need to sit in perfect stillness for 7 days to taste this kind of happiness. You do not need to become a monk or retreat to a mountaintop. The teaching is not about achieving some distant, extraordinary state. It is about recognizing something that is already quietly present in your ordinary life. Think of it this way. When you walk into a room where someone has been cooking something wonderful, you smell it immediately. The fragrance is just there. You did not create it. You simply walked in and noticed. The happiness the Buddha spoke of is a little like that. It is not something you manufacture. It is something you notice when you slow down enough to walk into the room of your own being. And we have all had these moments, even if we did not recognize them at the time. The moment when you step outside after a long day and feel the cool air on your skin and something inside you quietly says, "Ah." The moment when you watch someone you care about laughing and for no reason you can explain, your heart feels full. The moment when a piece of music finds you at exactly the right time and something tight in your chest gently lets go. The moment when you lie down at the end of a long day and feel the bed receive the weight of your body and everything in you softens. You did not plan for those moments. You did not earn them. They simply arrived because for one brief breath, you were not looking elsewhere. These moments are not accidents. They are glimpses. They are small windows into the kind of happiness that does not depend on anything going right in the world. And the more we begin to notice them, the more they seem to appear. There is a beautiful tradition in Buddhism of making a simple wish, a kind of quiet blessing that is offered not just for oneself, but for all living beings. It goes like this: may all beings be happy. It is one of the most ancient and beloved phrases in the Buddhist world, and there is something very tender about it. It does not say, may all beings get what they want. It does not say, may all beings be successful, or may all beings be comfortable. It says, simply, may they be happy, as if happiness were the deepest thing we could wish for one another, as if it were the very center of what it means to live well. Tonight, as you rest here, you might let that wish settle gently into your heart. May all beings be happy. May you, wherever you are, begin to feel that quiet happiness that has been waiting for you all along. Not because anything in your life has changed, but because, for just this moment, you have stopped reaching outward and allowed yourself to simply be. The wheel is turning true, and the road, as it turns out, was never the problem. Let us pause here for a moment. There is no rush. Simply notice how you are feeling right now. Let your breath be easy, and whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Sometimes, the most surprising discoveries are not the ones we go searching for. They are the ones that find us quietly when we have stopped trying so hard. In the Buddhist tradition, there is a gentle distinction made between two experiences that most of us bundle together under a single word. We call them both happiness, but they are actually quite different. One is joy. The other is something deeper, something the tradition calls sukha, which we might translate as ease or contentment, or a kind of happiness that has settled into its own stillness. Joy is wonderful. It rises like a wave. It can fill the body with warmth, with energy, with a feeling of lightness that makes the world seem to shimmer. But joy, by its very nature, moves. It swells, it crests, and eventually it passes. There is an excitement to joy, a beautiful aliveness, but also a restlessness. If you have ever laughed so hard that you needed to catch your breath, or felt a surge of delight that left you buzzing, you know what joy feels like. It is a visitor who arrives with great energy and eventually needs to move on. But beneath joy, when the wave has crested and the energy begins to soften, there is something else. Something quieter. It does not announce itself the way joy does. It does not sweep through the body or light up the mind. It simply sits there, like still water after the wind has stopped. A gentle sense of well-being. A feeling that nothing is missing. That you are, in this moment, enough. That life, in this moment, is enough. This is the happiness the Buddhist path gradually reveals. Not a replacement for joy, but what remains when joy has done its beautiful work and moved on. There is a story about a young man who traveled far from home to spend many months in silent practice at a small retreat center in the hills. He was given a simple room with very little in it. A bed, a window, bare walls. Each day he would rise before dawn and sit in meditation, and each evening he would return to this small room and sit again. In the early weeks, not much seemed to happen. His mind was busy, his body restless. Some mornings, his legs ached from sitting. His thoughts circled endlessly, returning to the life he had left behind, to conversations unfinished, to plans half made. He wondered more than once if he had made a mistake in coming. The silence felt heavy at times, almost oppressive, and the simplicity of his days left nowhere to hide from his own restlessness. But he stayed. He kept sitting, and slowly, without any great dramatic moment, without any flash of insight or thunderclap of understanding, something began to shift. It started as a warmth in his chest during the morning sittings, a feeling he could not quite explain. It was not connected to any particular thought or memory. It was just there, like sunlight finding its way through a gap in the curtains. Over the following weeks, this warmth deepened. It spread through his body. Some mornings he would sit down, take a few slow breaths, and feel a kind of happiness rise up from somewhere he could not name. It was not loud or dramatic. It did not make him want to leap up and shout. It simply filled him, the way water fills a bowl, quietly and completely. He would sit there in that small room, on that simple bed, and feel a sense of love and well-being so full that it almost seemed to hum. He had not done anything special to earn it. He had not solved any great problem or received any wonderful news. He had simply been sitting, day after day, in the same quiet room, and happiness had come to him the way spring comes to a hillside. Not all at once, but unmistakably. After many months of this, he began to have a curious thought. All this happiness, all this warmth, sitting in this one spot for so long, surely some of it must have soaked into the room itself, into the bed, into the walls. He smiled at the thought, knowing it was a little fanciful, but there was a part of him that believed it too. There was another practitioner at the same retreat center, a serious, disciplined man who had been there even longer. He followed every rule meticulously. He sat for hours without moving. He was deeply committed, but he was also, quite visibly, struggling. His face carried a kind of tightness that never quite softened, even in the gentlest moments of the day. His shoulders were drawn up. He moved through the hallways with the careful intensity of someone trying very hard to get somewhere, as though enlightenment were a destination he could reach if only he walked quickly enough. He reminded the first man of himself, in a way, of those early weeks when the silence had felt heavy and the sitting had felt like work. The difference was that this man had been at it for much longer, and the heaviness had not lifted. It had hardened into something more like determination, which is a fine quality in many parts of life, but which can become its own kind of trap when what you truly need is to let go. One morning, the first man passed him in the corridor and quietly asked a simple question, something small and practical. Where might he find something he needed? The second man turned sharply. "You are not supposed to be speaking," he said, his voice tight with frustration. "You are disrupting the silence." The first man said nothing more. He simply nodded and walked on. But he felt something for this fellow practitioner. Not pity, exactly. More like recognition. He understood what it was like to try so hard that the trying itself becomes the obstacle. To grip the practice so tightly that there is no room left for anything gentle to enter. To confuse effort with progress and discipline with peace. And so quietly, privately, he found himself wishing that this man could come and sit in his room for a while. Not to meditate in any particular way, just to sit in that space where happiness had been gathering softly for all those months, as if the room itself might offer what all the discipline in the world could not. Permission to stop trying. Permission to simply receive. There is a teaching here that is easy to miss because it is so simple. Joy and happiness are not achievements. They are not rewards we earn by practicing hard enough or living well enough. They are more like qualities of our own being that we have overlooked, the way you might overlook a quiet friend in a noisy room. The Buddhist tradition describes something remarkable about the human mind. It says that we are capable of a vast range of inner experiences. Some teachers describe over 100 different states of awareness that a person can move through. And of all these many states, the great majority are peaceful or even beautiful. They carry within them a quality of ease, of openness, of natural well-being. And how many of these states involve suffering? Only a very small number. A tiny handful out of all the rooms in this vast inner house. Think about that for a moment. Imagine your mind as a house with many, many rooms. Some are filled with light. Some are quiet and warm. Some have windows that look out onto gardens you have never seen. A few rooms, perhaps 3 or 4, are dim and uncomfortable. And yet, somehow, most of us have spent our lives moving between those few dim rooms as if they were the entire house. We have paced the same small hallways, opened the same heavy doors, and believed that this was all there was. But the house is so much larger than we knew, and most of its rooms are filled with light. This is not wishful thinking. This is not a pretty metaphor designed to make you feel better. The Buddhist tradition treats this as a practical observation about the nature of the mind. We have more capacity for peace, for ease, for quiet happiness than we have ever used. The potential is already there. It has always been there. We simply have not yet learned to walk through all the doors. Now, what keeps us in those few familiar rooms? Why do we pace the same small space when the rest of the house is waiting? The Buddhist teachings point to something very simple. We are distracted, not by one big thing, but by 1,000 small ones. Our attention is pulled this way and that all day long, like a leaf in a stream. We are thinking about what happened yesterday, planning for tomorrow, worrying about something someone said, rehearsing what we will say in return. And while we are caught in this current of thoughts and reactions, we simply do not notice the quiet happiness that is already here, waiting just beneath the noise. We become so accustomed to the busyness of the mind that it starts to feel normal. We forget that there is any other way to be. The rushing, the planning, the low hum of worry, it all blends together into a kind of background static that we mistake for life itself. And underneath that static, quiet as a heartbeat, something patient is waiting. It is a little like standing in a garden at night, convinced that there are no stars because you have been staring at your phone. The stars were always there. You only needed to look up. The Buddha understood this deeply. He saw that much of human unhappiness is not caused by the conditions of our lives, but by the habits of our minds. The way we get tangled in wanting things to be different than they are. The way we resist what is here and reach for what is not. the way we scatter our attention across so many concerns that there is nothing left to simply be present with. An undisciplined mind is like an elephant running wild, the Buddha once said. And a wild elephant does not stop to notice the beauty of the forest it is crashing through. And so the path he offered was not about adding more to our lives. It was not about acquiring new things or achieving new states. It was, in the most beautiful way, about subtraction, about gently setting down the things we did not need to carry, about learning to be still enough, quiet enough, present enough to notice what was already here. There is a phrase in the Zen tradition that captures this beautifully. A student once traveled many days to sit with a renowned teacher. When he arrived, he bowed and asked, "What is the essence of your teaching? What is the one thing I must understand?" The teacher looked at him calmly and said, "Attention." The student waited. Surely there was something deeper, something more complex, some secret that would unlock the mystery of the mind. "Yes, but what else?" he asked. "What comes after attention?" "Attention," the teacher said again. "Attention. Attention." The student was puzzled. He had expected sutras and lectures and philosophy, but the teacher offered only this one word, repeated like a bell. This is not a trick answer. It is the most honest one. Because when we truly pay attention, when we gather our awareness into this moment rather than scattering it across a dozen others, something shifts. The noise of the mind begins to soften. The space between thoughts grows a little wider. And in that space we begin to notice what has been waiting there all along. Not fireworks, not ecstasy, just a quiet, steady warmth. The feeling of being at home in your own being. You do not need to go anywhere to find it. You do not need to sit for months in a small room, although that is a beautiful thing to do. You only need to pause, even for a moment, and pay attention to the feeling of the air on your skin, to the sound of your own breathing, to the simple fact that you are here, alive, resting, and that in this moment, nothing is wrong. Most of the rooms in your house are filled with light. You have simply been standing in the hallway, looking at your phone. Let us pause here for a moment. You do not need to do anything at all. Just rest and breathe and notice how you feel. Whenever you are ready, we will continue on together. How does someone begin to find their way toward peace? This is a question that has been asked for thousands of years, and the answers have taken many forms. But in the Buddhist tradition, there is a description of the path that is especially tender, because it begins not with strength, not with discipline, not with any great spiritual achievement, but with something much more humble. It begins with honesty. The Buddha described a natural unfolding, a series of stages that build gently upon each other, the way a garden grows. You do not force a seed to become a flower. You simply give it the right conditions, and it opens in its own time. The path toward inner peace works in much the same way. One stage creates the conditions for the next, and the next creates the conditions for the one after that. And the very first stage, the one that sets everything else in motion, may surprise you. It is the willingness to be honest about the fact that something hurts. There is a story about a woman who traveled a great distance to visit a healer in a small village by the sea. She had been unwell for a long time, not in any way she could easily describe, but in the way that sometimes settles into the bones and makes the world feel grey. She had tried many things. She had kept busy. She had filled her days with distractions. She had told herself and everyone around her that she was fine. When she arrived at the village and found the healer, he was sitting on the porch of a small wooden house, looking out at the water. He did not seem hurried. He did not seem to be waiting for anything in particular. He simply looked up as she approached and gestured for her to sit. She sat down across from him and waited. She expected him to examine her, perhaps to offer her some remedy or some wise advice. Instead, he simply looked at her with kind eyes and said, "Tell me where it hurts." She opened her mouth to answer and found that she could not speak. Not because there was nothing to say, but because there was so much. Years of it, layers of it, and she had never, not once, allowed herself to say it plainly. She had always found a way to change the subject, or to soften it, or to wrap it in a laugh and hand it back as though it were nothing. The healer did not rush her. He did not fill the silence with questions. He simply sat quietly and waited, the way the sea waits for the shore. After a long time, she began to speak. Slowly at first, haltingly, as if she were learning a language she had forgotten. Then more freely. She spoke about the tiredness she had been carrying, the sadness she had not wanted to name, the loneliness she had covered over with busyness, the way she had been pretending, even to herself, that everything was all right. When she finished, the air between them felt different, lighter somehow. The healer nodded. "That is the beginning," he said softly. "You cannot find your way to peace while you are pretending you are already there." She looked at him. "But I have not done anything," she said. "I have only told you what is wrong." "Yes," the healer said, and there was a warmth in his voice that surprised her. "And that is the bravest thing most people will ever do." This is what the Buddhist tradition means when it places suffering at the very start of the path. It is not saying that suffering is good or that we should go looking for it. It is saying something much gentler than that. It is saying, when you are in pain, be honest about it. Do not turn away. Do not numb yourself to it. Do not plaster a smile over the ache and tell the world you are fine. Because here is what happens when we are honest about our suffering. Something remarkable opens up. A kind of doorway appears that was not visible before. When we stop pretending, when we set down the weight of keeping up appearances, we suddenly have room for something new. And what rushes into that room, almost immediately, is a kind of hope. The Buddha called this faith. Not faith in the way it is sometimes understood, as believing in something you cannot see or accepting a doctrine without question, but faith as a kind of quiet confidence, a feeling that says, if I can be this honest about what is difficult, then perhaps there is a way through it. Perhaps this is not all there is. Perhaps there is a path I can walk, and perhaps I am strong enough to walk it. It is the feeling you get when you have been lost in the woods for a long time and you finally catch sight of a trail. You do not know where it leads. You do not know how far it goes. But you know it is a trail, and you know that someone has walked it before you. And that alone is enough to lift the heaviness from your shoulders and put a little warmth back in your step. And this quiet confidence, this willingness to believe that change is possible, is what gives rise to the next stage, which the tradition calls delight. Delight is a beautiful word, and it describes a beautiful experience. It is the feeling that comes when you realize you are no longer stuck. When you look at your life and notice that you have begun to move in a direction that feels true. When your actions begin to line up with your values and you feel, perhaps for the first time in a long while, that you are living with some integrity. There is a particular kind of delight that comes from knowing you are on a good path. Not a perfect path. Not a path where everything is easy or clear, but a path that feels honest. A path where you are no longer running away from yourself. Perhaps you have felt this in your own life. The quiet satisfaction of having been kind when you could have been harsh. The gentle pride of having chosen patience over reaction. The warmth that comes from knowing that today you tried to live well. These are not dramatic feelings. They do not make headlines, but they are deeply nourishing, like bread after a long walk. And they matter more than we sometimes realize. In the Buddhist understanding, this kind of delight is not a luxury. It is not a bonus you receive after years of effort. It is a necessary part of the path. Without some taste of it, without some sense that our efforts are bearing fruit, it becomes very difficult to continue. We need that warmth the way a traveler needs water. We need that encouragement the way a plant needs light. And the beautiful thing is that it does not come from outside. No one needs to hand it to you. It comes from your own actions, from the choices you make each day, quietly, without fanfare, without anyone watching. It comes from the simple dignity of trying to live a good life. There is a story about an old monk who lived in a monastery high in the mountains. He had been there for many years. Each morning, he would sweep the courtyard before the other monks awoke. It was a simple task. The courtyard was not large, and the sweeping did not take long. But he did it with such care, such quiet attention, that the other monks sometimes paused to watch him through the windows. One day, a young student who had recently arrived approached him after the morning sweeping was done. The courtyard stones were still damp, and the first light was just beginning to warm them. "May I ask you something?" the student said. The old monk nodded. "Why do you always sweep the courtyard yourself? There are younger monks who could do it. You have been here longer than anyone. Surely you have earned the right to rest." The old monk smiled. It was the kind of smile that comes from having been asked a question you have thought about for a very long time. "When I sweep," he said, "I am not cleaning the courtyard. I am cleaning my mind." The student looked puzzled. The old monk leaned the broom against the wall and sat down on the stone step beside him. "Each morning, I wake up and there is dust. In the courtyard, yes, but also in here." He touched his chest lightly. "Small worries, old habits, little tangles of restlessness that gathered while I was sleeping. And so I take the broom and I begin. Stroke by stroke, the courtyard becomes clear. And stroke by stroke, something in here becomes clear, too. By the time I am finished, I feel a kind of gladness. Not because the courtyard is clean, but because I showed up for my life this morning. I did one small thing with care, and that is enough to begin a good day." The student sat with this for a while, watching a bird hop along the edge of the courtyard wall. Then he asked, "And what happens after the gladness?" The old monk looked out at the mountains, where the mist was beginning to lift. "After gladness comes calm," he said. "And after calm, if you are patient, comes something very like peace." This is the gentle logic of the path the Buddha described. Honesty about suffering opens the door to faith. Faith opens the door to delight. Delight, the quiet gladness of a life lived with care, opens the door to something the tradition calls joy. Joy is warmer, more expansive, a feeling that begins to spread through the body like sunlight through a window. And joy, in its own time, begins to settle. The way a river slows as it reaches a wide open valley. The energy is still there, but it is no longer rushing. It becomes calm. It becomes tranquil. And this tranquility, this deep settling of all our restless energies, is what creates the ground for the kind of happiness we have been speaking of tonight. None of these stages are forced. None of them are demanded. They unfold the way a flower opens, each petal making room for the next. And the whole process begins with the simplest, most courageous act a person can perform, telling the truth about how they feel. It is worth pausing here to say something important. This path is not a ladder. It is not a test. It is not something to measure yourself against or feel guilty about. The Buddha did not describe these stages so that we would look at ourselves and think, I am not far enough along. He described them so that we might understand how natural the journey toward peace really is. If you have ever been honest about a difficult feeling, you have already taken the first step. If you have ever felt a small spark of hope that things could be different, you have already taken the second. If you have ever felt glad about a kind choice you made, or a moment of patience, or a day when you lived a little more gently than the day before, you have already taken the third. You are further along than you think. The path is not somewhere out ahead of you. It is already beneath your feet. There is a saying in the Zen tradition, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. But perhaps it is even simpler than that. Perhaps the journey begins the moment you stop pretending you do not need one. The Buddha once said, in the end, only 3 things matter: how much you loved, how gently you lived, and how gracefully you let go of things not meant for you. And the letting go begins, always, with honesty, with the courage to say, this is where I am. This is what I feel. And from here, I'm willing to take the next small step. So tonight, wherever you are on this path, know that it is already unfolding. You do not need to push it along. You do not need to be further ahead. The seed does not rush toward the sun. It simply grows, one quiet day at a time, trusting the light. And the light, as it turns out, has been there all along. Let us rest here for a moment. Feel the ground beneath you. Feel the ease of having nowhere to be. And when you are ready, we will walk on together. Most of us have spent a long time looking for happiness. We have been looking for it since we were very young, though we may not have called it that. We called it other things: comfort, success, security, love, the right job, the right home, the right life. And we set out after these things with great sincerity, believing, as most of the world believes, that happiness is something you find at the end of a long search, that it is waiting for you in a particular place, and if you are diligent enough, clever enough, lucky enough, you will arrive there. The Buddha had a beautiful compassion for this kind of searching. He did not dismiss it. He did not call it foolish. He simply noticed with the quiet clarity of someone who has watched the same pattern unfold 1,000 times, that the search itself often leads us in circles. Tonight, let us look gently at some of those circles, not to judge ourselves for having walked them, but to see them clearly so that we might, in our own time, find our way to something more lasting. There is a particular kind of happiness that comes from relief. You know this feeling well. You have been carrying something heavy for a long time, a worry, a tension, a difficult stretch at work or at home, and then, finally, it passes. The burden lifts, and in that moment of release, there is a flood of something that feels very much like happiness. A long week ends, and you sink into the quiet of an evening with nothing to do. A difficult conversation you have been dreading turns out to be easier than you feared. A pain that has been troubling you finally eases. In those moments, the body softens, the mind opens, and there is a wash of something lovely. We breathe out. We smile. We think, yes, this is what I have been waiting for. And it is real. That feeling is genuinely pleasant. There is nothing false about it. But there is something important to notice about it. It only lasts as long as the memory of the burden is fresh. The happiness of relief is always defined by what came before it. It is the shadow cast by the weight we were carrying. And once the memory of that weight begins to fade, as it always does, the happiness fades with it. Like a cool breeze that feels wonderful on a hot day but means nothing in autumn. This is why relief is always temporary. It is not a spring that flows on its own. It is more like the silence after a loud noise. Beautiful, yes. Welcome, certainly. But it only exists in relation to what came before. And so we find ourselves, almost without realizing it, in a strange and tiring cycle. We accumulate stress so that we can feel the relief of releasing it. We wind ourselves tight so that we can feel the pleasure of unwinding. We work ourselves to exhaustion so that we can feel the sweetness of finally resting. And we begin to mistake this rhythm, this endless tightening and loosening, for happiness itself. We begin to think that this is all happiness can be. The Buddhist tradition looks at this pattern with great gentleness and says, there is another way. There is a story about a merchant who lived in a busy town. He was a good man, well-liked, hard-working. He had a wife who loved him and neighbors who respected him. But he had a dream. For years, he had wanted to build a fine house on the hill above the town. He could see the spot from his shop window, and each day as he worked, he would glance up at it and imagine the house that would one day stand there. The thought of it kept him going through long days and difficult seasons. His wife would sometimes find him standing at the window, gazing up at the hill. "You are looking again," she would say, smiling. "One day," he would answer, "one day it will be ours." And she could see how much it meant to him, how the thought of that house on the hill was the bright thread running through his years. So she did not discourage him. She saved alongside him. She waited alongside him. And after many years, the house was finally built. It was everything he had imagined. Tall windows that caught the morning light. A garden with a view of the valley below. Rooms that smelled of new wood and possibility. On the first evening, the merchant and his wife sat together on the porch and watched the sun set over the town where they had spent so many years dreaming of this very moment. "Are you happy?" she asked. "I am," he said. And he meant it. But after a few months, something began to shift. The rooms that had felt so full of possibility began to feel simply like rooms. The view from the garden, which had once taken his breath away, became familiar. He still liked the house. He was still glad he had built it. But the happiness, that bright, warm feeling that had filled him in the early days, had quietly slipped away, the way morning mist lifts from a valley without anyone noticing exactly when it went. His wife noticed before he did. "You are looking out the window again," she said one afternoon, gently. He turned, startled. He had not realized he had been doing it. But she was right. He had been standing at the window of their beautiful new house, gazing across the town to a different hill. And he had been thinking, that would be a lovely place for a garden. This is what the Buddhist teachings call the happiness of fulfillment. It is the happiness that comes when a wish is granted, a desire met, a longing satisfied. And it is, in its own way, a real kind of happiness. The problem is not that it is false. The problem is that it does not stay. We have all lived some version of this story. We wanted something very badly. We worked for it, waited for it, imagined how wonderful it would feel to finally have it. And when we got it, there was a burst of warmth, a sense of arrival, a moment when the world seemed to say, yes, you did it. But the warmth faded. The sense of arrival gave way to a new restlessness. And before long, the mind was already reaching for the next thing, already gazing at a new hill, already composing a new dream. It is not that the dream was wrong. It is that we asked the dream to do something it could not do. We asked it to make us happy forever. And no dream can carry that weight. The Buddha spoke about this with the image of a person trying to quench their thirst with salt water. Each drink seems to help for a moment, but it only deepens the thirst. Not because the water is bad, but because it is not the kind of water that truly satisfies. This is not a reason to stop wanting things. It is not a reason to feel guilty about our desires or to punish ourselves for having dreams. The teaching is gentler than that. It is simply an invitation to notice, to see the pattern clearly and to hold it with kindness. To say to ourselves, yes, I know this one. The happiness of getting what I want. It is lovely while it lasts, and it does not last. And that is all right, because there is a deeper well, one that does not run dry with the seasons. There is one more circle worth looking at, though it is a quieter one, and we may not always recognize it in ourselves. Sometimes, we find a strange kind of comfort in comparison. We look at the people around us and measure ourselves against them, and when we come out favorably, something inside us relaxes. We feel a little safer, a little more solid, a little more all right. This can take very subtle forms. It is not always as obvious as gloating or cruelty. Sometimes it is just a quiet inner voice that says, well, at least I am doing better than they are. Or a small flicker of satisfaction when someone who intimidated us stumbles. We may not be proud of these feelings. We may not even want to admit they are there. But they are very human and very common. And the Buddhist tradition asks us to look at them not with shame, but with curiosity. Because what is really happening in those moments? What is the mind actually doing? It is trying to protect itself. It is trying to build a little fortress of identity, a sense of I am all right, by comparing itself to others. And there is a kind of temporary ease in that. But it is a fragile ease. It depends entirely on the other person remaining where they are. If they rise, our ease collapses. If they succeed, our comfort vanishes. We have built our sense of well-being on someone else's foundation, and that foundation can shift at any moment. The Buddha saw this with perfect clarity. He understood that any happiness built on comparison is a house built on sand. Not because comparison is evil, but because it places our peace in someone else's hands. And the kind of happiness worth seeking is the kind that rests in our own. So if the happiness of relief does not last, and the happiness of fulfillment fades, and the happiness of comparison crumbles, where does that leave us? It leaves us, perhaps, in exactly the right place. Because it is only when we see clearly that these circles do not lead where we hoped, that we become willing to look in a different direction. There is a saying attributed to the Buddha, "In the sky, there is no distinction of east and west." People create distinctions out of their own minds and then believe them to be true. We do the same thing with happiness. We create elaborate maps of where it should be found, what it should look like, what conditions must be met before we are allowed to feel it. And then we spend our lives following those maps, rarely stopping to ask whether they were accurate in the first place. What if happiness were not at the end of the map? What if it were not at the end of anything? What if it were here, right now, underneath all the searching? Not something to be found, but something to be uncovered. Not a destination, but a quality of being that has been waiting, quietly, all along. This is something the great teachers have always known, that the one who stops running is the one who arrives. That the one who stops grasping is the one whose hands are finally full. It sounds like a riddle, but it is more like a homecoming. That is the invitation the Buddhist path extends. Not to stop living, not to stop wanting or dreaming or reaching for things that matter, but to recognize, gently, with the kindness of someone who has walked the same circles many times, that the deepest happiness does not come from any of those things. It comes from something much closer, something that has been with you since before you started looking. There is a Zen saying that goes, "Sitting quietly, doing nothing, spring comes, and the grass grows by itself." You do not need to make the grass grow. You do not need to pull it up from the earth with your hands. You only need to stop paving over the ground. Tonight, as you rest here, you might notice the places where you have been searching, the things you have been reaching for, the maps you have been following, and you might, just for this moment, set them gently down. Not forever, just for now. Just to see what is already growing, quietly, beneath your feet. Let us pause here. Let the breath come easily. Let the body settle. And when you are ready, we will continue on together. Right now, your body is here. You can feel it. The weight of your limbs. The texture of whatever is beneath you. The quiet rhythm of your breathing, which has been going on all this time without you needing to think about it at all. But where is your mind? If you are like most of us, it has been traveling. Even as your body has been still, your mind has wandered to a dozen different places. It has drifted to something that happened earlier today. It has reached forward into tomorrow. It has revisited a conversation, rehearsed a plan, worried about something that may never happen. It has been busy, your mind. It has been everywhere except here. This is one of the most ordinary experiences of being human. And it is also, according to the Buddhist tradition, one of the deepest sources of our unease. There is a teaching in Buddhism that is easy to overlook because it sounds so simple. It says that when our body, our mind, and our intentions are all in the same place at the same time, something remarkable happens. A kind of wholeness settles over us. A feeling of being gathered, complete, present. And out of that wholeness, a very natural happiness begins to arise. It sounds simple because it is simple, and yet it is one of the rarest experiences most of us ever have. Think about how much of your life is spent divided. Your body sits at a table, but your mind is at your desk. Your hands are washing dishes, but your thoughts are somewhere else entirely. You lie down at the end of the day, and your body is ready to rest, but your mind keeps running, chasing some thread it picked up hours ago and refuses to put down. We are scattered, not dramatically, not in some obvious way that anyone would notice from the outside, but quietly, constantly, like a river that has been split into a dozen smaller streams. Each stream still flows, but none of them carries the full force of the water. None of them runs deep. And we have grown so used to this that we think it is normal. We think everyone lives this way. And perhaps they do. But that does not make it our deepest nature. There is a Zen saying, when you walk, just walk. When you eat, just eat. It sounds almost comically simple. But try it, truly try it, and you will see how radical it is. Try eating a meal without thinking about anything except the food in front of you. Try walking down a street without your mind running ahead to where you are going. It is extraordinarily difficult. And in those rare moments, when you manage it, even briefly, there is a shift, a settling, a feeling of being more fully alive than you were a moment ago. The Buddhist path is, in many ways, about gathering those scattered streams back together, about bringing the full force of who we are into a single, undivided flow. And when that happens, when we are truly whole and truly here, the depth of what we feel is extraordinary. There is a story about an old woman who lived alone in a cottage at the edge of a forest. She was known in the nearby village for her quietness and for a kind of steady warmth that people found hard to describe. Children liked her. Animals were not afraid of her. When people came to visit, they often left feeling strangely rested, as though they had slept well for the first time in weeks, even though they had only sat with her and talked. One day, a young woman from the village came to see her. This young woman was bright and capable, but she carried a restlessness that she could not seem to shake. She was always busy, always thinking 3 steps ahead, always managing some plan or worry. She was tired, though she could not say exactly why. "How do you do it?" The young woman asked. "How are you so calm? You live here alone, with so little, and yet you seem more at peace than anyone I know." The old woman poured 2 cups of tea and set one before her guest. "Watch the tea," she said. The young woman looked down at her cup. The tea had just been poured. It was cloudy, full of tiny leaves and sediment swirling in the hot water. She watched. Slowly, the swirling calmed. The sediment began to drift downward, and after a few minutes, the tea was perfectly clear and still. "That is what I do," the old woman said. "I let myself settle." The young woman frowned. "But how?" "My mind never stops. Even now, sitting here with you, I am thinking about what I need to do when I get home, what I should have said to someone yesterday, whether I remembered to close the gate. The old woman nodded, as though this were the most natural thing in the world. Of course, she said, the leaves are always swirling. That is what leaves do when the water is stirred. You do not need to stop them. You cannot stop them by wanting them to stop. You only need to stop stirring. The young woman sat with this. She wrapped her hands around the warm cup and felt its heat pass into her palms. But what does that mean? How do I stop stirring? I do not even know I am doing it. The old woman looked at her with great kindness. You are doing it right now, she said gently. You are sitting here with me, drinking tea, and somewhere in your mind you are already at home, already closing the gate, already in the next hour of your life. Part of you is here. Part of you is there. And so long as you are divided like that, the water cannot clear. So what do I do? Nothing, the old woman said. That is the whole secret. You do nothing. You sit here. You drink your tea. You let yourself be in one place. Just one. And the settling happens on its own. The young woman looked down at her cup again. The tea had become perfectly still. She could see the bottom of the cup. She could see her own reflection in the surface, faintly, like a face appearing in a quiet pond. Oh, she said softly. The old woman smiled. Yes, she said. Oh. This image, the cup of tea slowly clearing, is close to what the Buddhist teachings describe when they talk about the settled mind. We do not become peaceful by forcing our thoughts to stop. We become peaceful by no longer adding to their momentum, by no longer stirring. And what does the stirring look like? It looks like desire pulling us towards some imagined future. It looks like worry replaying the past. It looks like restlessness that keeps us reaching for our phone, or planning, or rearranging things that do not need to be rearranged. It looks like the 1,000 small ways we keep ourselves busy so that we never have to be still long enough to feel what is actually here. The Buddha described 5 particular patterns that keep the mind churning. He called them hindrances, though perhaps a gentler word would be habits. The habit of wanting what we do not have. The habit of pushing away what we do not like. The habit of restlessness, of always needing to be doing something. The habit of heaviness, of sinking into dullness when the mind does not know what else to do. And the habit of doubt, of constantly questioning whether any of this matters. These are not flaws. They are not signs that something is wrong with us. They are simply the ways the mind keeps itself stirring. And they are remarkably ordinary. You can see them at work in the simplest moments. The restlessness that makes you reach for your phone when you have been sitting quietly for 30 seconds. The wanting that turns a peaceful evening into a search for something to eat, something to watch, something to fill the space. The doubt that whispers, even now, this is not working. I should be doing something else. The more we can recognize these patterns, gently, without judgment, as if we were watching leaves swirl in a cup of tea, the more naturally they begin to settle. Not because we fought them, not because we pushed them down or argued with them, but because we saw them clearly and chose, just for a moment, not to pick up the spoon. When the mind does settle, when the stirring slows and the water begins to clear, something quietly extraordinary happens. The body, the mind, and the heart arrive in the same place. And in that arriving, there is a feeling that is hard to put into words. It is not excitement. It is not even what most people would call joy. It is quieter than that, warmer. It is the feeling of coming home after a long time away and sitting down in your own chair and realizing that nothing needs to happen next, that you are simply here, and that being here is, for reasons you cannot quite explain, deeply good. This is the happiness the Buddha spoke of when he described the deeper stages of the path. Not a happiness that depends on something going well in the world. Not a happiness that requires a particular thought or a particular feeling, but a happiness that arises out of wholeness, out of being undivided, out of all the scattered pieces of who you are gathering together in one place, like birds returning to a single tree at dusk. There is a beautiful simplicity to it. You are not trying to feel anything in particular. You are not chasing any special state. You are simply here, all of you, at once, and that turns out to be enough. Many people who sit quietly for a long time report this experience with a kind of wonder. They say things like, "I was just sitting there, and suddenly I felt happy, and I could not tell you why." Or, "Nothing special was happening. I was just breathing. And I felt this warmth, this contentment, and it did not seem to come from anywhere." They often sound surprised, as if they had found something valuable in a place they had walked past 1,000 times without looking. And what surprises them most is how ordinary it feels. They expected fireworks. They expected bliss or visions or some great revelation. And instead, they got something much simpler and, in its own way, much more profound. Just a feeling of being all right, of being whole, of being here, and finding that here is a good place to be. This is not a mystical experience. It is not reserved for monks or saints or people who have spent decades in practice. It is simply what happens when the mind stops scattering itself long enough for its natural warmth to be felt. The way you can feel the warmth of the sun on your skin the moment a cloud passes. The sun was always shining. The cloud was the only thing in the way. The Buddha put it beautifully when he said, "Peace comes from within. Do not seek it without." Not because the outside world has nothing to offer, but because the deepest peace, the most sustaining happiness, is not something the world can give you or take away. It is something that reveals itself when you stop looking elsewhere and simply arrive where you already are. This is what it means to come home to yourself, not to achieve some extraordinary state, not to become someone different, but to gather all the scattered parts of who you are, the worrying mind, the tired body, the hopeful heart, and let them rest together in the same place. To let the tea settle, to let the water clear, and to notice, with surprise and perhaps with gratitude, that what is left, when all the stirring stops, is something very close to peace. You do not need to do this perfectly. You do not need to do it at all, not tonight. But if you like, you might simply notice where your attention is right now. Is your mind here, with your body? Or has it wandered off again, as minds do, to some other time and place? If it has wandered, that is fine. That is what minds do. You might just invite it back, the way you would invite a friend to come sit beside you. No urgency, no scolding, just a gentle, "Come, be here." There is nowhere else you need to be. And if, in that returning, you feel something settle, something soften, something quietly warm, then you have felt what the Buddha was pointing toward all those years ago. Not something far away, not something you need to earn, just the simple, remarkable experience of being whole, of being here, of being home. Let us pause here for a little while. Let the stillness hold you, and whenever you feel ready, we will gently continue. There is a question that sometimes visits us in the quiet hours. We do not always invite it. It simply appears like clouds on a clear afternoon. And the question is this: what happens to peace when life becomes difficult? When something precious is lost? When the heart is heavy and the world feels less kind than it did before? It would be dishonest to speak about happiness without also speaking about sorrow. They are not strangers to each other. In fact, in the Buddhist tradition, they are understood to be deeply connected. Shore and sea, always touching, always belonging to one another. You cannot have one without the other. And learning to be at peace with both, to allow both to move through you without resistance, is one of the most tender teachings the tradition has to offer. So let us turn toward this gently, together, and see what we find. There is a story about a woman who came to a silent retreat after a year of great loss. In the space of just a few seasons, several people she loved dearly had passed from her life. One after another, like lanterns going out along a path. She had been carrying this sorrow for a long time, and she had come to the retreat not because she expected it to be fixed, but because she did not know where else to go. At home, she had tried to grieve. She had given herself permission to feel what she felt. But at home, grief came in long, slow waves. It would rise in the morning and stay with her through the day, a dull heaviness that never quite lifted. Sometimes it would last for hours. She would sit with it, try to breathe through it, but it lingered like fog in a valley, thick and grey and seemingly without end. On the retreat, something different happened. The grief still came. It came in waves, just as it had at home. But here, in the silence, without the 100 small distractions of daily life, without the phone ringing or the dishes needing washing, or the conversation that pulled her attention sideways, something changed about the way it moved. The waves were more intense. She could feel them rising from deep inside her body, powerful and raw, as though the sorrow had been waiting for a place where it was safe to fully arrive. Her chest would tighten, her eyes would fill, and the feeling would move through her like weather, like a great gust of wind passing through an open room. But instead of lasting for hours, these waves passed through her in minutes. They would rise, crest, and then dissolve, like a wave breaking on the shore and then drawing back into the sea. And in the space that followed, in that quiet aftermath, she found something she had not expected. Peace. Not the absence of sorrow. Not the feeling that everything was fine or that the losses did not matter. But a genuine, quiet peace. A stillness like a lake after the wind has passed. It was as real as the grief had been. It had weight and warmth to it. It felt like being held by something larger than herself. It would last for a while, this peace, sometimes for an hour, sometimes longer. And then another wave would come, and it too would pass, and the peace would return. She later described this experience to others, and what she said was very simple. At home, she had been grieving with half of herself. The other half was busy, distracted, occupied with the ordinary business of daily life. And so the grief could never fully move through her. It was always being interrupted, always being held back by the thousand small things that kept her attention divided. It was like trying to cry while also answering emails. The tears came, but they could never finish. But on the retreat, there was nothing in the way. The grief arrived fully, and because it arrived fully, it was free to pass fully. And what was left behind, each time, was peace. There is something very important in this story, and it has to do with resistance. Most of us, when something difficult arrives, have an instinct to push it away, to distract ourselves, to fill the space with noise or activity or plans so that we do not have to sit with what hurts. And this is understandable. It is deeply human. We do not want to feel pain. We do not want to feel sadness. We want to be happy, and so we turn away from the things that are not happy and hope they will leave on their own. But the Buddhist tradition offers a different understanding. It suggests that it is not the difficult feeling itself that causes us to suffer most. It is our resistance to it, the pushing away, the tightening, the refusal to let it be here. There is a saying in the Zen tradition, the resistance to the unpleasant situation is the root of suffering. Not the situation itself, the resistance. Think of it this way. When a wave comes towards you in the ocean, you have a choice. You can brace yourself against it, tighten every muscle, plant your feet, and try to stand firm. And if you do, the wave hits you with its full force. It knocks you off balance. It tumbles you. The harder you resist, the harder the fall. And when you finally surface, gasping, the next wave is already on its way, and you brace again, and the cycle continues, and you wonder why the sea feels so exhausting. Or you can do something else. Something that feels, at first, like it takes more courage than bracing. You can soften. You can let your body be light. You can let the wave lift you, carry you for a moment, and set you back down. You do not fight it. You do not pretend it is not there. You simply allow it to move through you, as you might allow music to fill a room. And when it has passed, you are still standing, perhaps a little moved from where you were, perhaps with salt on your skin and sand between your toes, but unbroken, and strangely, quietly at peace. The people who seem most at ease with life are often not the ones who have avoided difficulty. They are the ones who have learned to soften into it, to let the wave come and to let it go. Not because they do not feel it, but because they have discovered that they are larger than any single wave, that they are, in some quiet way, the ocean itself. This is what non-resistance looks like. Not giving up, not being passive, not pretending that difficult things do not matter, but choosing, gently, not to add the weight of struggle to the weight of what is already here. Even the Buddha himself understood loss. The tradition tells us that he carried a tenderness throughout his life for his mother, who was absent from his earliest days. It was not something he pushed aside or pretended was resolved. It stayed with him, this tenderness, even after he had found the deepest peace. And there is something reassuring in that. The idea that peace does not mean the absence of feeling. It does not mean becoming numb or distant or untouched by life. It means feeling fully without being broken by what we feel. There is a beautiful phrase sometimes used in Zen: every day is a good day. At first, it can sound strange, even insensitive. How can every day be a good day when some days bring us face to face with hardship, when some days are heavy with confusion or sadness? But the phrase does not mean what we might think. It does not mean that every day is pleasant. It does not mean that we should pretend to feel happy when we do not. It means something much deeper. It means that every day is real. Every day is what it is. And when we stop fighting with what is, when we stop insisting that today should be different from what it is, there is a kind of rightness that settles over us. Not happiness in the ordinary sense, but something close to it. Something like peace. Something like being in harmony with the way things actually are, rather than the way we wish they would be. A wise teacher once said that what he looked for in his students was not any particular state of mind, not some perfect calm or unshakable bliss, but flexibility. The ability to move between states, to feel joy when joy arrives, and to feel sorrow when sorrow arrives, without clinging to one or fleeing from the other. To be like water, taking the shape of whatever vessel it is poured into, without losing anything of itself. This is a gentler picture than we sometimes imagine when we think of spiritual practice. We imagine someone sitting perfectly still, untouched by the world, like a statue in a garden. But the truth is more human than that. The truth is a person who feels everything, who is moved by life, who laughs and cries and is sometimes confused, but who has learned to let each feeling arrive and let each feeling pass. Who does not get stuck. Who does not grab on and refuse to let go. Who trusts the current of life to carry them where they need to be. This is perhaps one of the most freeing things a person can learn. That peace does not require perfection. That you can feel sorrow and still be at peace. That you can face difficulty and still carry a kind of quiet steadiness inside you. That happiness and sadness are not enemies but neighbors, living side by side, and that a heart large enough to hold both is a heart that has truly learned to live. The woman who came to the retreat discovered this, not as a philosophy or an idea, but as a lived experience. She felt the waves of her sorrow move through her, fully and completely, and she felt the peace that waited on the other side. Not because the sorrow was gone, but because she had finally stopped standing in its way. There is a tenderness to this teaching that is hard to put into words. It does not ask us to be strong. It does not ask us to be brave. It asks us only to be willing. Willing to feel what is here. Willing to let it move. Willing to trust that, like a wave, it will pass. And that what remains, when it does, is something we can rest in. There is an old Buddhist story about a teacher who was asked by a student, "How do I find peace in the middle of a storm?" The teacher thought for a moment and then said, "Do not look for the place where there is no storm. Look for the place within you that the storm cannot reach." The student sat with this for a long time. "Where is that place?" He asked. "It is the place that is not fighting," the teacher said. "It is the place that is simply watching the storm pass." We all have this place inside us. It is not far away. It is not something we need to create or earn or achieve. It is the quiet center that remains when everything else is moving. The eye of the storm if you like. The stillness at the bottom of the sea, while the waves roll and crash above. You may not feel it right now. You may not feel it tomorrow. But it is there. It has always been there. And on the days when life is gentle, and on the days when life is hard, it is waiting for you. Patient, steady, quiet, like the shore that is always there, no matter how far the tide goes out. Let us rest here. Let whatever you are feeling be here, too. There is no need to change it or fix it. Just let it be, and let yourself be held by this quiet moment. Whenever you feel ready, we will continue on together. A child walks down a road after it has rained. She is not thinking about where she needs to be. She is not running through a list of things she must do. She is looking at the puddles. She stops and crouches down and watches the way the light moves on the surface of the water. She sees the sky reflected there, upside down, and the branches of a tree, and the slow drift of a cloud. And she is perfectly, completely happy. Not because the puddle is extraordinary, but because she is seeing it as it is, without needing it to be anything else. We were all this child once. We all knew how to look at the world this way. Somewhere along the road, we forgot. We learned to walk past the puddles without looking. We learned to see the world through the filter of what we needed from it, what it could give us, what was wrong with it, what still needed to be fixed. And the simple happiness of seeing clearly, of looking at what is here and finding it beautiful, slipped away so gradually that we did not even notice it was gone. But it can be found again. And finding it is less about learning something new than it is about remembering something very old. There is a teaching that runs quietly through the Buddhist tradition, and it has to do with the way we see. Not what we see, but how we see it. The same event, the same moment, the same experience can look entirely different depending on the lens through which we view it. A rainy afternoon can feel like a prison or a gift, depending on what we bring to it. A long wait can feel like a waste of time or an unexpected invitation to be still. A difficult year can feel like nothing but hardship, or it can become, in time, the very thing that taught us how to be kind. This is not about pretending. It is not about pasting a cheerful face over something genuinely painful. The Buddhist tradition has far too much respect for honesty to suggest anything like that. It is about recognizing that in most situations, there is more than one way to see what is happening, and the way we choose to see it shapes, profoundly, how we feel. The Buddha spoke of this when he said, "We are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world." Not in some magical sense, but in the very practical sense that the stories we tell ourselves about our lives become the experience of our lives. And if we can learn to tell gentler, truer, more generous stories, the experience changes with them. There is a story about a man who went through a very difficult stretch in his life. Things had not gone as he had planned. He had lost work that mattered to him. Friendships had shifted. He felt uncertain about his path, and for a long time he could see nothing good in what had happened. It felt like a season of winter that had gone on too long, and he carried it heavily. Years passed. The difficulty did not disappear, but it softened. He found new work. New friendships grew. His life rebuilt itself in ways he had not expected, like a forest growing back after a fire, not the same as before, but alive and green in its own way. And then one day, a friend came to him in distress. This friend was going through something very similar to what he had once faced. She was frightened and confused and did not know how to move forward. She sat across from him and said, "I do not know what to do. I feel like the ground has been pulled out from under me." And the man found, to his surprise, that he knew exactly what to say. Not because he had read it in a book, not because he had studied what to do, but because he had lived it. He knew the shape of that particular darkness. He knew what it felt like at 3 a.m. when the mind will not stop turning. He knew the way hope can feel impossible when you are in the middle of it, and he knew, from his own experience, that it would pass. He sat with his friend and he listened, truly listened, without rushing to fix anything. And then he spoke to her from a place that was completely genuine. He said, "I have been where you are, and I know it feels like it will never end, but it does. It changes, and you will be different on the other side of it in ways you cannot imagine right now. But you will be all right." And what he offered her was not advice, exactly. It was something rarer than advice. It was understanding. The kind that can only come from someone who has walked the same road and come through to the other side. His friend looked at him and said quietly, "Thank you. I believe you, because I can see that you know." Afterward, he sat alone for a while and thought about the difficult years. And for the first time, he did not see them only as something that had happened to him. He saw them as something that had prepared him, not perfectly, not painlessly, but really, truly prepared him to be of help to someone he cared about. He had not planned to feel grateful, but he did. This is the gentle art of seeing differently. It does not deny that difficult things are difficult. It does not require us to smile through our pain or pretend that everything happens for a reason. It simply invites us to stay open to the possibility that there is more going on than we can see right now. That the meaning of an experience is not always clear while we are living it. And that sometimes the very things we thought were losses turn out to be gifts we could not have recognized at the time. There is a Zen story about an old farmer whose horse ran away one day. His neighbors came to him and said, "What terrible luck." The farmer shrugged. "Perhaps," he said. The next day, the horse returned, and it brought 2 wild horses with it. The neighbors came again. "What wonderful luck," they said. "Perhaps," said the farmer. The following day, his son tried to ride one of the wild horses and fell and hurt his leg. "What terrible luck," the neighbors said. "Perhaps," said the farmer. And the day after that, soldiers came through the village looking for young men to take far away, but they passed over the farmer's son because of his injured leg. "What wonderful luck," the neighbors cried. "Perhaps," said the farmer. The story could go on forever, and that is the point. We are always in the middle. We never have the full picture. And the farmer's gentle "perhaps" is not indifference. It is wisdom. It is the willingness to say, "I do not know what this means yet. I will wait. I will stay open. I will not decide too quickly whether this is good or bad." And in that waiting, in that openness, there is a kind of peace. There is another dimension to seeing differently, and it has to do with beauty. We tend to think of beauty as something that belongs to sunsets and mountain views and perfectly arranged flowers. But the Buddhist tradition has a wider understanding. Beauty is available everywhere if we are willing to look for it. In light falling across an ordinary wall, in the face of a stranger on the street who, if you look closely, has the most remarkable eyes, in the sound of rain on a roof, in the silence between two notes of music. One of the people at a gathering on happiness once said something that stayed with the teacher long after the talk was over. She said that she had discovered a particular kind of happiness in finding beauty where she did not expect it, in looking at something ordinary, something she might have passed without a second glance, and choosing to really see it. And in that seeing, something opened, a connection, a warmth, a quiet sense of being part of something larger. She gave an example. She said that sometimes she would look at a person she did not know, perhaps someone on the street or in a crowded room, someone she might not have found immediately warm or easy to be around. And she would look past the surface. She would look at their eyes. And there, almost always, she would find something beautiful. A spark, a softness, some quality of aliveness that connected that person to her and to everyone else in a way that made her feel less alone. It is like discovering a garden behind a wall, she said. You walk past the wall 100 times, and then one day you look over it, and there it is. This is available to all of us, in every moment, without any special training. It is simply the art of paying attention, of slowing down enough to notice what is here, the texture of the fabric beneath your hand, the particular shade of the sky right before evening, the sound of someone breathing nearby, the way a stranger's face changes when they smile. These are not grand things, but they are real. And when we give them our attention, they give us something back. A feeling of presence, a feeling of being alive, and very often, without our trying to make it happen, a feeling of happiness. There is a country in the mountains of Asia that decided, many years ago, to measure its success, not by how much wealth it produced, but by how happy its people were. While the rest of the world counted money and goods and output, this small country asked a different question. Are our people content? Are they well? Are they living lives that feel meaningful and good? It is a beautiful idea. And whether or not it works perfectly in practice, there is something profound in the asking. It suggests that a society, like a person, has a choice about what it values, that we do not have to accept the world's definition of success, that we can choose, gently and deliberately, to measure our lives by a different standard, not by how much we have accumulated, but by how deeply we have lived, not by how far we have traveled, but by how fully we have arrived, not by how busy we have been, but by how present we have been. And this choice is available to each of us, individually, right now. We do not need a government to make it for us. We can make it quietly, in the privacy of our own hearts. We can decide that happiness matters, that learning to see beauty matters, that kindness matters, that the quality of our attention is worth as much as the quantity of our achievements. The Buddhist tradition has always understood this. It has always placed happiness, true happiness, at the center of the path, not as a reward at the end, not as a lucky accident along the way, but as a practice, as an art, as something we can learn, like cooking or gardening or listening well, something we can get better at day by day, not by trying harder, but by paying closer attention, by choosing, again and again, to see the world through gentler eyes. And the beautiful thing about this art is that it does not require any special conditions. You do not need a mountaintop or a monastery or a year of silence. You need only this moment, this breath, this willingness to look at what is here and to see it, perhaps, a little differently than you did before. As we come toward the end of our time together tonight, you might let your mind rest on something small and good from your day. It does not need to be important. A taste, a color, a kind word someone offered, a moment when, for no particular reason, something felt all right. Let it be there, gently, like a stone warming in the sun. You do not need to hold on to it. Just notice it. Just let it be. The Buddha said, thousands of candles can be lit from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared. May your happiness tonight, however small, however quiet, light something warm in you. And may that warmth, in its own time, find its way to others. Let us rest here, gently. Breathe softly. And when you are ready, we will take one last step together. We have traveled a long way together tonight, through stories of kings and merchants, monks and healers, through puddles reflecting the sky and cups of tea slowly clearing. We have looked at the happiness that fades and the happiness that stays. We have spoken about grief and beauty, about the scattered mind and the quiet miracle of coming home to yourself. And now, as we near the end of our journey, there is one more thing worth resting with. Something the Buddhist tradition considers the most sublime happiness of all. And it may surprise you, because it does not look like happiness as we usually imagine it. It looks like peace. There is a teaching that runs through the heart of the Buddha's path. It says that beyond joy, beyond even the warm contentment we have been exploring tonight, there is something quieter still. The tradition calls it equanimity. It is a word that can sound distant or cold if we are not careful, so let us be careful. Equanimity is not indifference. It is not the flat calm of someone who has stopped caring. It is something far more alive than that. It is the steadiness of a mind that has stopped swinging between grasping and pushing away. It is the openness of a heart that can hold both the beautiful and the difficult without tightening around either one. Imagine standing on a hilltop on a clear evening. Below you, the whole valley is visible. The villages, the rivers, the roads leading in and out. People are going about their lives. Some are celebrating. Some are struggling. Some are resting, just as you are now. The light is fading, and the first stars are beginning to appear. And you, standing there, can see all of it. You are not separate from it. You are not above it. But you are not lost in it either. You can hold the whole of it in your gaze, gently, with warmth, without needing any of it to be different from what it is. That is something close to equanimity. And the teachers who have tasted it say that it carries a happiness so deep, so quiet, so vast, that the word happiness almost feels too small for it. It is more like being at home in the universe, like discovering that you belong here, that you have always belonged here, and that nothing that comes or goes can change that. There is a story about a student who had been practicing for many years. She had experienced great joy in her meditation. She had experienced deep calm. She had felt rushes of love and waves of gratitude. And she went to her teacher one day and said, "I have felt so many wonderful things, but I am always waiting for the next one. When will I arrive?" The teacher looked at her kindly. "You keep collecting beautiful experiences," he said, "like someone filling a basket with flowers. But you have not yet noticed the field." The student did not understand at first. She had spent years cultivating these experiences, treasuring each one, carefully arranging them in her memory, like precious things on a shelf. "The joy is a flower," the teacher said. "The calm is a flower. The love, the gratitude, these are all flowers, and they are beautiful. I would never ask you to stop appreciating them. But the field they grow in, that open, quiet space that holds them all, that is what you are looking for. You do not need to pick the flowers. You only need to recognize that you are the field." She sat with this for a long time. At first, it confused her. She had always thought the practice was about having good experiences, about trading difficult states for beautiful ones. But the teacher was pointing to something else entirely. Not any particular experience, but the space in which all experiences arise and dissolve. Not a flower, but the earth itself. And when she finally understood, what she felt was not another experience to add to her collection. It was something much simpler. A sense of space, of openness, of being large enough to hold whatever came, joy or sorrow, calm or restlessness, without needing to hold on to any of it, and without needing to push any of it away. She said later that it was the most peaceful moment of her life, and also, strangely, the happiest. Not because anything wonderful was happening, but because she had stopped needing something wonderful to happen. This is what the Buddha meant when he said that the highest happiness is peace. Not the peace of having everything go your way. Not the peace of having solved all your problems or answered all your questions, but the peace of a mind that has come to rest in itself, that has stopped chasing and stopped fleeing and simply arrived here in this moment, open to whatever it holds. It is available in the most ordinary moments, in the pause between one breath and the next, in the silence after you finish speaking, in the space between sleeping and waking, when the mind is soft and the world has not yet made its demands, in the moment when you look up from whatever you are doing and notice with a kind of surprise that everything is all right, not perfect, not solved, but all right, and that you are here for it. You have felt it before. Perhaps you did not have a name for it. Perhaps it lasted only a moment before the mind started up again with its plans and worries. But it was there, real as sunlight, quiet as snow, and it will be there again, because it is not something that comes and goes. It is the ground beneath everything that comes and goes. Steady, patient, always here, always waiting for you to stop long enough to notice. The Zen master, Thich Nhat Hanh, once said, "Peace is every step, not at the end of the road, not after the work is done, not someday when conditions are finally right. Every step, this one, and this one, and this one. So tonight, as you rest here, you do not need to reach for joy. You do not need to reach for happiness. You do not need to reach for anything at all. Simply let yourself be held by whatever this moment is. Let the breath come and go. Let the thoughts drift. Let the body be soft. And if, somewhere in the quiet, you notice a feeling of peace, you might recognize it for what it is. Not just the absence of noise, not just the relief of having nothing to do, but something deeper, something that has been here all along, underneath the searching, underneath the striving, underneath the 1,000 questions about what will finally make you happy. This, just this, the highest peace. Let us rest here together, one last time. There is nowhere else to go, nothing left to understand. Just this breath, just this stillness, just this quiet, gentle moment of being alive. We began this evening with a question: what will finally make us happy? And perhaps, as we reach the end, the answer is simpler than we expected. Not a thing, not a place, not a circumstance that needs to line up just right, but a quiet turning inward, a willingness to stop reaching and to notice what is already here. The Buddha saw this clearly thousands of years ago. That happiness is not something we chase down. It is something we uncover. And the deepest happiness of all, the one he called the highest, is peace. The peace of a mind that has come home to itself. The peace of a heart that has room for everything. You carry that peace with you, even now. Even on the difficult days. Even when the mind is busy and the world is loud. It is there, beneath it all, quiet as a candle in a still room. May all beings be happy. May all beings be at peace. And may you, wherever you are tonight, feel something of that peace settling gently into your bones. There is nowhere you need to go. Nothing you need to fix. You are already home. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us here at Sleepy Monk.